Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by GoCollect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the GoCollect channel, and I want to welcome you to another video. In this video, we are going to do something different. We are going to take some time to actually talk about a topic that has been kind of sort of ignored by and large, and we actually want to dig into it, and we're going to do it in lieu of doing our standard recap video. And my hope, and GoCollect's hope, is that you're going to enjoy this video nevertheless. In this video, what we are going to talk about is the simple fact that not all 9.8s are created equally. And over the course of this video, what I will endeavor to do is to highlight the factors that will influence why one 9.8 may actually sell for more than another 9.8 of the exact same book. It goes without saying that there are a lot of variables that will influence why one 9.8 of a comic will sell for more than another 9.8 of that exact same comic. And some of those variables include things like where a comic is actually sold, the method of sale, as well as the time of day. So for example, if you have an auction that essentially ends during a prime time of the day, you could have a lot of bidders that are looking at that book, bidding on that book, and also driving up that price. And you could see an auction book go for more than a book of a 9.8 that is actually sold as a buy it now because of the spirit of competition. In this video, I actually want to set those factors aside, and I really just want to focus on those variables that are related to a comic that could result in one 9.8 actually selling for more than another. In addition to that, I also want to highlight specifically how GoCollect can actually help you to figure out why this happens. The very first factor that I want to talk about is page color. There are people out there that are willing to pay a little bit more for a comic when it has white pages. And so you could see a difference between a 9.8 with white pages versus a 9.8 with off-white to white pages. It's also important to mention that there is a little bit of difference in the way that white pages shows up when you look at comics over time. Because paper quality and printing technology has changed over the decades, white from the modern era is a little bit different from white pages of the 60s, for example. Both are considered white, even though there is a difference in how they actually show up when you look at them. So page color is an important factor to consider. Another factor that has the potential to affect price is centering. Ideally, what you want is when you're looking at a comic to only see the artwork from the front cover. But what can happen during the production process is that something is misaligned and the cover is actually shifted to the left, where what you'll see is from the front part of what is intended to be on the back of the book. That'll be shifted to the front, and part of the front artwork is actually cut off. This is actually okay because it is essentially a production defect that is allowable, and this book can still get a 9.8. But with that said, it is not necessarily desirable because a lot of collectors are trying to get the most perfect copy of a comic that they can potentially get. What readily comes to mind for me when I think about centering or miswraps is X-Men issue number 101. And I actually have a copy of this book. It is a nice copy of this book, but it is a miswrapped comic. And what happens is when you look at it, you essentially see a white strip down the side of this book because it is miswrapped. And if I had an opportunity to upgrade this book, I absolutely would do so because that white strip bothers me. So When you're thinking about which 9.8 to pick up, you may want to look at the centering and evaluate whether that book is miswrapped or not. The third factor is something that I've essentially already alluded to, and that is production defects. There are a lot of things that can go wrong during the printing process. And if those things that go wrong are pretty widespread so as to affect a healthy percent of the print run, companies like CGC will actually grandfather those defects in. One of the defects that readily comes to mind for me are bindery tears. And a bindery tear is essentially what happens down at the corner of a comic, either the top or the bottom, where because the comic is maybe thicker, it has a lot of pages, there is a little bit of a chad, if you will, that will hang from the book. And this is, again, a production defect that is allowable. Books that have a bindery tear, for example, can still get a 9.8. And the book that readily comes to mind for me is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 800. This was an 80-page book that Marvel decided to bind like a regular comic instead of doing a square bound. Ideally, a square bound would have not resulted in bindery tears, but they made the decision to attach the cover with a couple of staples, and that resulted in bindery tears. And if you look, you can actually find some books, not a lot, that do not have a bindery tear. The vast majority of Amazing Spider-Man issue number 800 absolutely have this bindery tear. I love the book, but I do not love the bindery tear. So looking for defects like bindery tears is something that you definitely want to be aware of, because again, if you're going to get a 9.8, ideally you want the best possible copy that you could find. The fourth factor that I want to throw out for your consideration is reversion or paper memory. This is a term that I've started to see out there a little bit in the comic book community. And essentially what reversion is where a comic that has been pressed for some reason or another will revert to its previous condition. So you could have a book that is pressed by a third-party grading and possibly even CCS that is then graded and has a 9.8 because it looks perfect. Over time, that book might actually revert, where those defects that were pressed out of that comic actually present themselves again, hence the term paper memory. And so it's important that when you're buying a comic, that you don't just want to focus on the grade that is on the label. You actually want to look at the book itself, because there could be defects that are now there that were not there when that book was previously graded. So at this point, you might be wondering, how can GoCollect help with any of this? I'm glad that you asked that question, because we are going to dig into that now. One of the great things about GoCollect is that it provides you with sales data. It provides you with the individual transactions that resulted in that sales data. And as part of that, what you have the ability to do is to look at the actual book that was sold. You can literally pull up an individual transaction and look at a slabbed comic front and back. This gives you the ability to look for things like what we've talked about in this video. Things like the page color, centering, production defects, and possibly even reversion. This is invaluable, and it goes a long way to helping you to figure out why one comic may have sold for one price and another sold moments later or moments before for a completely different price. You have the ability to drill down into the data. But if you don't have your own membership to GoCollect, you might not be able to see this data. And so I want to give you guys my promo code that will allow you to get 30 days free access to GoCollect so that you can kick the tires and figure out whether this is a resource that you want to pay for. That code is Regie129. And I can tell you for a fact that I do not buy or sell a comic without referring to the data on GoCollect.com. I've had my membership for 3 years and I find it to be invaluable. With that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I'm definitely going to encourage you guys to hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more content like this, make sure that you leave a comment behind and give us some ideas for some things that you might want to see me cover in future videos. As always, if you guys need to reach out to me, make sure you leave those comments behind because I will be reading and responding to them. Take care.